So the first thing I want to talk about is Azure Service Bus. And we're going to bring up the new edge, some instance of the new edge. Which one do I want? Should have been, let's see, this one? Yeah, sure, we'll bring up this one. If you've used Azure at all, these windows are going to look somewhat familiar. I've got a bunch of resources in a VS 2019 demo resource group, and we'll hit some of these resources as we go along. So Azure Service Bus. Azure Service Bus is a cloud-hosted, publish-subscribe mechanism that lives in Azure. Go ahead. It depends on who you ask. No is the short answer. It is a component, or if you're a cloud version of BizTalk, that would be one piece of many that you would need to pull together to replace BizTalk. It's a pub/sub component. It does do. It will reach out to on-prem. It has its own cloud-based API, right? We're making HTTP calls back and forth to talk to this thing. Includes security, includes scalability. Obviously, everything you say about Azure, a lot of the trick here is it's scalable, and it's scalable by me just asking for more resources or paying for more resources from Azure. I don't have to provision my own VMs to build things out. There's a couple of other things. Actually, I'm not going to talk about them today necessarily, but there's other components that you really need to glue together to if you're going to replace something like BizTalk. If you talk to Microsoft, you talk about a cloud-based integration architecture, they're going to talk to you about Service Bus, logic apps, function apps, and a few other things. They're going to leave off some of the standard adapters that have been built up over time. They're going to leave off orchestration, and again, there are other technologies out there that will offset it. And there's a couple of BizTalkers, maybe BizTalkers in the crowd. So pipe up as you see fit. So pub/sub. So this does support transactions, and it is platform independent to an extent, right? This is cloud hosted. So when I publish a message, it's going to be maintained in Azure. When I consume a message, it's maintained in Azure. But there's really I don't have to write a C# app to talk to this, right? I can write anything that can talk to HTTP endpoints, can publish messages, and there's standard libraries that are available for a number of different platforms. The code itself looks pretty straightforward, looks pretty simple. And again, not sophisticated code. This is just an idea to give you, excuse me, while I bring up the right version of Visual Studio. Or any version of Visual Studio. I'm sorry? Okay. Control. Wow. Yes. Where are we going here? How's that? I don't even need my glasses anymore. This is awesome. I should do this. I should work like this. Okay, so Azure Service Bus. As I said, this code is pretty simplistic. Look, there's a connection string very hard coded into the code. Don't ever do that. I think I just said this last week to somebody. You know, that should be in a key store and should be put into your pipeline when you do the deployment. But I'm not talking about DevOps, so forget I said that. I have a demo topic. I have a client, and I'm doing some async calls to pump messages into a screen, into a queue. So some very simple code. This just sends 10 or so messages. You know, we instantiated a client. Let me just go through that a little bit slower. So I've got a topic client provided by SDK, the Azure SDK. I then have I'm creating a topic client using the connection string, so connecting me to Azure, right? And then I've got a wrapper to send a message async, and here I'm just sending it 10 times, creating a new message, and then awaiting a send async. All right, fairly straightforward code, makes sense? Okay. There's receive code for this as well, but it's pretty much looks the same except for it's receiving. Let's take a quick look at that. And then there's my send, here's my receive. This app is just a .NET Core console app. So receive is pretty much the same. Code is pretty simple. Not sure why I put a breakpoint in there. Oh, to check my arguments. For a little bit later, I'm going to actually parameterize this and send a topic and a subscription. Don't tell some of the people in the room that I didn't use the system command line library to do my parameters. I'm really sorry. Other people can talk about that later. Yeah, I know. I got booze. People are going to start throwing rotten vegetables at me. So I'm sitting here waiting results from my async call and my main async. I'm registering an event handler, so when something gets put on a queue, I'm going to get notified. Or I'm sorry, gets put onto the bus, I'm going to get notified. So I've registered that handler. When stuff comes in, I process the message and I just write out command line. Again, this is pretty simple stuff, straight off of the website. The point here is not to illustrate my extensive coding skills. So I'm going to just leave that there. Yeah, thanks. There you go. Straight man. So in theory, I've got a command here where I'm going to, let's see, just make sure I am where I am. All right, so if hopefully that's at least somewhat visible. Well, do I need to change my PowerShell window as well? We're not going to be spending that much time here, but to let me know if we do. So this is my send event. If I do .NET run from here, I could also run this from Visual Studio, but hey, whatever. All right, so I'm pumping 10 messages in. If we go back to the service bus, again, this is the Azure server-side representation. Is that visible? We need to pump that up a little bit. What we're seeing here, my default view, my service bus namespace. The namespace, again, is just an addressable namespace, a virtual container for where my service bus lives and where queues and topics are going to live. I have security around this, shared access policies. I need to have secure strings in order to access this. One of them you saw buried in my code. If I was going to actually consume this in a real world scenario, that probably goes into a key vault. And in fact, one of the demos I have later actually pulls the connection string out of an Azure key vault. Again, I've got ability to geo-replicate. Obviously don't need to do anything that sophisticated here. I have the ability to do queues, so first in, first out queuing mechanism, and I can also do topics. Topics allow me to get a little bit more sophisticated with the messaging architecture or the approach that I'm going to take. For purposes of today, I just created two topics, one for demo, one for location. The first one we're going to look at is demo. This topic has had a bunch of messages pumped through it in spite of what those current messages say. And I have 3 different subscriptions here. That's why I use the mouse, so I don't press accidentally. What's interesting about this is I have one app that pushed messages to the bus, and I created 3 different subscriptions for 3 different reasons. The first one that I've got is just called Demo Sub 1. So if I go to my other app here and I just say, hey, receive read messages, come on, enter key, work. Thank you. It's going to flush all the messages out of that queue. So that was the C# code that we just looked at. Read, write on one end, read on the other end. Okay. I go back and take a look, and we do a quick little refresh here, and we're going to see that there's 0 messages. Note that demo sub 2 and demo sub 3 are already empty. That's because there's logic apps that are triggering on messages arriving in those subscriptions, and then it's doing semi-interesting things with those messages. Okay? So far so good. I'm going to keep rolling.